After my first semester of university at the beginning of May, I decided to reward myself by getting tickets for a band I wanted to see. They weren't playing in my hometown, unfortunately, and the nearest venue they were playing was a small town 6 hours away by train. I had a friend who attended university in the town who agreed to let me stay with her, so I figured that I would be fine to go on up. I had never been to this town before, but having lived in larger cities my entire life, I often associate small town with safety. I declined my friend's offer to drive me to the concert, considering she was studying for finals, and I enjoy a good walk anyway. The town was divided by a river, and to cross that river you had to first go over one bridge, then walk around through a park on an island, then cross a second bridge to get back to town. To get to the first bridge from my friend's university, you had to walk down a nature trail. All this was perfectly lovely, as I did it at sunset. I had just emerged from my first winter in a rather harsher environment than I had grown up in, and the whole nature trail/park combo was filled with joggers and children playing, squirrels, and everything I had missed. This is only noteworthy in that I felt completely at ease with my route, but I was pretty distracted and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to exactly which path I had taken. The concert did not let out until probably a little bit past midnight. I got to the first bridge, crossed, and then proceeded across the island to the second. It was a really nice night out, and I was actually enjoying myself in the warm spring air. That is, until I suddenly found myself upon a hill I didn't remember walking over on the way there. I stopped at the base of it, feeling that something was off, but eventually attributing it to the fact that I had somehow forgotten an entire hill. How funny, I thought as I walked up this mystery hill. All my thoughts ceased, though, as I got up to the top and found myself looking down upon the path into an empty carnival, and beyond that, the second bridge. Bit of context, I'm a 5'7", 120-pound female, trained as a circus performer, an aerialist, pretty much my entire life. This means that whatever extra weight I carry is pretty much all muscle, which serves, if for nothing else, then as a boost of confidence. I also didn't have any particular fear of carnivals or clowns or anything like that. But walking over this hill I didn't remember to see this entire empty carnival piece that I didn't remember definitely set me on edge. I didn't really see any way around it though, literally completely forest on either side. Plus, the bridge was right there. Besides, the carnival looked completely abandoned. I started off down the other side of the hill into this creepy carnival, maintaining a quick pace and definitely on high alert. I kept my focus mainly on the bridge I was aiming for. I was most of the way through when I suddenly saw these people. I saw them from far enough away that I didn't jump, but I did stop dead in my tracks. They seemed pretty normal looking by their clothes, but I was too far away to see their faces. They were sitting in whatever was available. Lemonade stands, immobile roller coasters, covered picnic tables. I really didn't know what to do about any of it at all, and I'm sure there were much better options available. In the moment, though, I felt I had to do something. I started to walk forwards again. As I did, I made eye contact with the first one of them that I saw, and held it as I walked through them. The man I had chosen to look at, I remember it very vividly. He looked a lot like I imagined Death himself would look like. A gaunt, drawn-out face with no expression of any type, sunken eyes that followed me as the rest of his body stayed completely still. From what I could tell, the rest did exactly the same. I was terrified out of my wits, and for some reason, making eye contact with this zombie of a man was the only thing I felt was keeping me safe. I never broke eye contact with him until I reached the second bridge, so far as to opt to walk backwards down the trail. I turned and crossed it at a sprint, and someone shouted behind me, which only prompted me to run faster. Now I mentioned that the route from the university to the bridge was a nature trail. This meant it had no lights on it, and it was as black as the void, trees covering up the moon and making it impossible to see anything. I didn't care though. I ran down that trail, tripping over who knows what, anything to put distance between me and these creepy carnival people. Eventually, I reached a patch of light at the edge of the university and stopped. There wasn't any noise anymore except for crickets and the sound of my own frantic breathing. If any of them had followed me, they certainly hadn't done so for long. I managed to gather myself together enough and remembered that I did in fact have a cell phone, which at that point I used to call my friend to have her meet me at a well-lit spot on campus, populated by studying students. I told her what had happened, and her eyes got real wide. As it turned out, unbeknownst to me, there were actually 2 trails through the park on the island, a north one and a south one. I had taken the north one on the way there, and accidentally taken the south one on the way back. She told me that people never ever passed through that carnival at night, as it was known to be where the local meth addicts would hang out. They were unpredictable at their best, and at their worst. Well, let's just say that muggings were the least of it. I had gotten off extremely lucky. In the end, everything ended up being explainable, but somehow that just made it even worse. I didn't sleep well that night, and when my friend offered to drive me to the train station across the river the following evening, I accepted right away. So this happened when I was younger, quite a while ago, but it's one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. I thought y'all might like to hear it. Anyway, I was probably about 12 or 13, and my mom dropped me and my younger brother off at this little carnival thing in the supermarket parking lot. I don't know if they really do stuff like that anymore, but they used to set up smaller carnivals with maybe 10 rides and a couple food vendors. Anyway, we had been there for maybe an hour or so, and I noticed that this guy had been watching us for quite a while. I realized also that he was sort of following us around to the various different rides. I figured he was one of the workers, since he was wearing a carnival hat, and his clothes were pretty much the same colors as the other people working there. I would look around, though, and spot him watching us from a couple rides over, or standing next to one of the food stands. Now, I don't want to be an asshole, but this guy just had the creepiest face. One of his eyes looked like it had been swallowed up by his huge swollen eyelid. He had these chapped lips that looked like they were almost bleeding in places, and he just kept following us around for like 30 minutes, just mumbling to himself and staring. Well, after a while, I decided we should leave and find a way to call my mom. As we were about to leave the carnival area though, literally about to walk through the exit, this guy hollers to both of us and grabs my brother's shoulder to pull him back in. He starts telling us that we're too young to be there alone and asking where our parents are. I mean, I was young, but there were tons of kids there even younger than us without their parents either. He pulled us off to this side area between 2 rides and pushed us behind him, then stood guard in front of us. I kept asking to use a phone to call my mom, since I was hoping it was actually about us being too young to be there by ourselves. Finally, he gives me this phone that obviously has no SIM card in it, because it just displays that error message that old phones used to have. I kept begging him to let us go, and he kept muttering to me, "No, we're gonna take you somewhere real safe. Real safe." He started laughing and asked if my mom had picked up yet. Obviously she couldn't, and saying that he's going to have to take us himself, since there's no one that wanted to take us, wherever the fuck he had planned at least. Finally, we see another worker walking by. I yell out to her to see if I can use her phone. The man immediately freezes, and then just starts walking away briskly like nothing ever happened. I explained to the woman what had just occurred, and she looked really confused and sort of worried. I didn't find this out until a couple of years later, but I guess she told my mom that she didn't think the guy even worked there. She had never seen him before in her entire time working. I was very young, probably about 3 years old. My mom and dad had taken me and my baby sister to some kind of carnival. I remember it as being very crowded with all kinds of people, and my parents had their hands very full with the baby stroller and my sister, myself as well. I'm sure it was a welcome reprieve then, when I stopped to talk to an old man and his wife. He was smiling this toothless but mostly welcoming smile, but what caught my attention were his hands, more specifically his fingers, or a lack of them. I can still see them now, squared off stubs on both hands. He only had a single forefinger on the right and a ring finger on the left. The amputations were so flat, so odd-looking, that I was completely fascinated. His aged wife was sitting beside him, longish, light gray frizzy hair, which was becoming wilder as the breeze teased through it. I honestly don't remember her saying much of anything at all. The old man would turn to her though from time to time, and rapidly speak in words I couldn't understand. I guess it must not have been English. Time passed and my parents wanted to get going. They had to be exhausted from hauling kids and gear around all day. This old guy though, he grabbed hold of my arm. It was at this time I remember the old woman started screaming. My dad grabbed me up and whisked me away. I remember being worried that he wouldn't be able to get my arm away from the old man, because when my dad abruptly picked me up, it hurt my arm where that old man was gripping it. Needless to say, my parents hauled ass to the car and hastily buckled my sister into her car seat. Soon our vehicle was slowly weaving its way out of there on the bumpy dirt road. This was back in the day before booster seats, so I was free to stand up and watch out the back window of our car. I could see her, the old lady, sprinting after our car with her arms outstretched toward me, screaming loudly and wildly, almost able to touch the trunk, her husband right behind her, screaming and yelling as well. Dad and Mom reassured me that they couldn't get me, but that I should sit down, so I did right away. I'm a 23-year-old woman who grew up in a small town in Idaho. This story takes place a few years ago. The county fair was a really big deal in my area. They would put on these big events and shows, and bring in some really fun rides and attractions. It was one of the few times we had excitement in our quiet little area. I remember I used to love attending the demolition derby and hypnotist show at the county fair every year. My cousins Jennifer and Kristen would go with me, and this particular year was no exception. The plan was to meet up at the fairgrounds at 1 to get good seats for the hypnotist show on a Saturday. We would then have some fun at the fair until the demolition derby that night. I wasn't able to drive at the time yet. I arranged for my dad to drop me off at the fairgrounds and pick me up later that night. He agreed and dropped me off about an hour early. I decided to kill time by wandering to the art display. It was in a small barn-like building toward the front of the grounds, so there I was admiring all the paintings, drawings, and photography that had been submitted when I started to get this strange feeling like I was being watched. I turned around and noticed a man standing not far away from me. I remember thinking he was dressed strangely for the sunny 90-degree weather we were having. He had a black hoodie, black denim pants, and black shoes on. He also had these painful-looking, burn-like sores around his lips. I couldn't really tell if he was still staring at me or not, because he had sunglasses on, but he smiled when I looked at him. He just stood there smiling at me until I waved politely and turned to leave. Just as I moved, though, the man walked toward me. "Hi there, my name is Jeremy." He spoke quickly and his movements were jerky as he reached out to shake my hand. "What's your name?" Getting a weird vibe, but deciding he was probably harmless, I decided to be nice. "Hello, Jeremy. My name is Chloe." I said it with a polite smile. I noticed more burn-like sores on his palm as I reached out to shake his hand, which grossed me out a little. The man named Jeremy walked away without a single word after that. I shrugged off the experience and checked the time, seeing as I was supposed to meet my cousins in about 15 minutes. I decided to go wait in the spot we were supposed to meet. As I left the building, I saw Jeremy standing by the door texting on his phone. I was a bit of an awkward teenager, so I pretended not to notice him as I walked past him and into the grounds. Just a few steps behind me, Jeremy started walking in the same direction as well. After a while, I started feeling a bit awkward with him walking so closely behind me, so I decided to stop and let him pass me by. I turned to enter a booth selling jewelry and pretended to admire its wares, but Jeremy stopped walking too. He leaned against a food cart not far from where I was and started texting again. I waited in the jewelry booth for what seemed like 10 minutes, and he still hadn't left yet. I decided to just leave, and just as I left the booth, Jeremy moved again right toward me. "Hello, my name is Jeremy," he said, again reaching out to shake my hand. "What's your name?" I was so confused. He couldn't have forgotten he already introduced himself to me. It was literally only 10 minutes ago. I thought maybe he might be joking, so I let out an awkward laugh. Hey there, Jeremy. It's nice to meet you again. My name is still Chloe, though." Jeremy seemed to miss my humor and continued talking, taking more interest in me. "Chloe is a pretty name. Are you from around here? How old are you?" Don't judge me for being so dumb. I was from a trusting small community, but I gave him an honest answer to his questions, in spite of getting a really weird vibe. Thank you. I'm 16, and yeah, I'm from the town just south of here." Just like before, once I had answered his questions, Jeremy seemed to catch interest in something else and walked away without a word. I checked the time and noticed I was now running late to meet Kristen and Jennifer. I made the rest of my way to where I was supposed to meet them without interruption. I told my cousins about what had happened while I waited for them, and they also thought it was a bit weird. We laughed it off and found our seats though. The hypnotist show started, and we enjoyed the beginning. But it wasn't long before I started getting that same feeling like I was being watched again. After a quick scan through the audience, I found something disturbing. Jeremy, the guy from earlier, was sitting a few rows behind us. He smiled and waved at me as soon as I recognized him. I realized though he was not alone this time. He was sitting with 3 other men, all dressed in black hoodies and sunglasses. I decided not to wave back, thinking he might have a crush or something, and I didn't want to lead him on. I could tell though that those men were watching us through the whole show. Kristen and Jennifer did too, and it made it really hard for us to enjoy the humorous antics of the hypnotist. We decided to leave before the show was over, and leave the fair for a while as well, hoping the creepy men in black hoodies wouldn't be there when we returned. We left for about an hour and a half to get lunch and spend some time at their house. After all this time, we decided it was probably safe to return. We walked back, but just as we walked through the gates of the fairgrounds, the same group of men in black hoodies approached us again. Jeremy walked straight up to me. "Hello, my name is Jeremy," again reaching out to take my hand. "What's your name?" My stomach was in knots. This was just not normal. I didn't shake his hand this time, wanting to get away from them quickly. I said nothing more, and we walked into the crowd not looking back. It would be some hours before I would see Jeremy again. We wandered the fair pretty much without interruption for the remainder of our wait, and we went to watch the demolition derby around 6 that night. We talked amongst ourselves and decided if we ran into Jeremy again, my cousin would pick up her phone and pretend I had a phone call from my dad, thus letting him know I wasn't alone even if we got separated. We agreed, and as the show ended, we still hadn't seen him around. We wandered around the game area and rode a few rides. It was dark and nearing the time I was supposed to meet my dad. My cousin got a call from him on the phone. He instructed me to meet him at a restaurant a short walk away from the fairgrounds in a half an hour. I agreed. Just as my cousins and I exited our last ride, I was once again approached by Jeremy. Alone this time. He walked right up to me and once again reached out for me to shake his hand. "Hello, I'm Jeremy," he said with a smile that split open some of the sores around his mouth. I was really sick of this guy, so I decided to give him some fake information this time. "Hello, Jeremy. My name is Hannah." He suddenly looked disappointed and shook his head. "It isn't nice to lie, Chloe," he said before walking away. The 3 of us got chills after that encounter. I told my cousins I was tired and wanted to go home. They agreed and offered to walk with me to meet my dad. They had a curfew of their own, and I didn't want them to be late. Besides, it wasn't a far walk, so I declined their offer. We parted with hugs, and I promised I would call them to confirm that I had made it home safely. I then exited the fairgrounds and walked through town to meet my dad. Not far away, though, I realized I was not alone. There was a tall man in a black hoodie following me. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized him as one of the men Jeremy had been with earlier. I quickened my pace, pretending not to notice him, and what I saw a half block down the road was even more disturbing. Another one of the 3 men Jeremy had been with was standing by the sidewalk ahead of me. I was really getting alarmed, so I crossed the street and walked to the other side. The 2 men in hoodies kept up my pace from the other side of the street, and I heard one of them making a whistling noise, though neither of them said anything. I was nearing the post office when Jeremy came into my vision at the end of the sidewalk in front of me. I was starting to get really scared. What were they doing out here? The place I was supposed to meet my dad was still pretty far away, and I didn't want to be on the street alone with them anymore, so I quickly ducked into the post office. They were about to close, but it turned out there was a man and his son just leaving. I explained what was going on to them and asked if I could walk with them. I hoped seeing that I wasn't alone would scare my stalkers away. They agreed and I left with them, but Jeremy and his gang were now nowhere to be seen. The friendly people I met at the post office walked me all the way to the restaurant, where I met my dad and told him the entire thing. My dad called the police and I explained what happened again to them. The report was filed, but Jeremy and his black hooded friends were never found. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you decided to watch this far to the end of the video. If you guys like the content of this video, please be sure to like, share the video, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure to hit that bell button and turn notifications to all, so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. Although you can also just stop by every once in a while since I post a video every day, so it'll be hard to miss them. If you guys have any thoughts on the stories or any criticisms on how I can make the video better, please be sure to leave those in the comments below. I always take joy in reading all of the comments and trying to respond to as many as possible, so I really appreciate when you leave them. If you guys want to send in a story yourselves, please be sure to check in the description below the video. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Try and send me a message on any of those, and I will read them as soon as I am able to, and get back to you if I can. If you do decide to send in your own story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to arrange proper formatting and use proper grammar as well, as it makes it easier to read in a video. Also, if you guys enjoy my content, I have 2 other channels I run as well, where I do monthly disaster documentaries and I do weekly true crime documentaries. Those channels are called Darkest Hour and Mr. Blue Skies respectively. You can find links to those in the description. Please be sure to check those out if you enjoy those kinds of content. Overall though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.